The sound arrived first, a dry, metallic rattle slicing through the 3:47 p.m. haze. It was the sound of a steel chain scraping against cracked asphalt, a sound that didn't belong in the drowsy quiet behind the convenience store. From her hiding place behind the overflowing green dumpster, 9-year-old Lily Munoz held her breath. The air smelled of sour milk and sun-baked garbage, a stench that clung to the back of her throat. She had been taking her usual shortcut home, a narrow canyon of brick and neglect that shaved 3 minutes off her walk, when the voices had frozen her in place. Now, peeking through a gap between the dumpster and the wall, she saw them. 3 of them, older boys, maybe 16 or 17, with lazy smirks and the kind of restless energy that always ended in something breaking. Their target was a single boy, cornered against the graffiti-scarred brick. He looked about 15, tall but thin, with dark hair falling over his eyes. He clutched a large sketchbook to his chest like a shield. "Just give us the jacket, man," the leader sneered. He was the one with the chain, wrapped loosely around his fist. The jacket wasn't anything special, just a simple black denim vest. But on the back was a small embroidered patch, a coiled serpent eating its own tail. It was subtle, not the loud, territorial declaration of a full club member. But it was enough. "You ain't earned this." "It was my dad's," the boy said, his voice tight but steady. His name was Leo. He'd told them his name, as if that might humanize him in their eyes. It hadn't. The leader laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Your dad a big, bad biker? He ain't here now, is he?" He shoved Leo hard. Leo stumbled, his back hitting the wall with a dull thud. His sketchbook fell, pages fluttering open to reveal intricate drawings of gears and clockwork animals. One of the other thugs stomped on it, grinding his heel into a delicate pencil sketch of a mechanical owl. A small, wounded sound escaped Leo's lips. That was the sound that broke through Lily's paralysis. It was the same sound a stray kitten had made when a car had clipped its leg last winter. It was the sound of helpless hurt. The chain wielder shoved Leo again, harder this time. Leo's legs tangled and he went down, his head narrowly missing a jagged edge of broken concrete. The thugs closed in. A kick landed in his ribs. Then another. The thumps were dense, sickening. Inside the Stop and Sip, the clerk glanced out the grimy window, saw the unfolding violence, and deliberately turned his back to restock a shelf of cigarettes. A sedan slowed as it passed the mouth of the alley, its driver's face a brief mask of concern before the light changed and the car accelerated away. The world was looking away. Everyone was looking away. Lily felt a hot, unfamiliar surge flood her chest, pushing out the cold fear. It was anger, pure, simple, and incandescent. Her grandmother, Elena, had always told her, "Courage is not the absence of fear, Mija. It is doing what is right when you are terrified." Her eyes darted around her cramped hiding spot. Beer cans, greasy wrappers, and a single empty bottle of Mexican Coke, its thick green glass glinting in the sliver of sunlight. Her hand, small and trembling, closed around its neck. It was heavy, solid. Without a second thought, she swung it with all her might against the steel side of the dumpster. The explosion of shattering glass was shockingly loud, a violent crack that echoed off the brick walls. "Stop it!" she screamed, her voice a thin, reedy arrow in the sudden silence. "I see you. I'm calling the police." The thugs froze, heads snapping toward the sound. They couldn't see her, only the glittering shards of glass on the ground and the dark space she occupied. The sudden, unseen intervention, the mention of police, it broke their rhythm. They were bullies, not soldiers. They thrived on predictable fear, not surprise resistance. The leader shot a nervous glance toward the street. A witness, even a child, was a complication they hadn't factored into their fun. "Forget it," he spat, giving Leo one last, contemptuous kick. "Let's go." They sprinted out of the alley and vanished around the corner. Lily stayed perfectly still, her heart a wild drum against her ribs, listening to the fading slap of their sneakers on the pavement. Only when the alley was completely silent, save for Leo's ragged breathing, did she allow herself to sink down behind the dumpster, the sharp edge of a broken bottle still clutched in her hand. The 12th Precinct station smelled of stale coffee and industrial-strength cleaner, a chemical perfume that failed to mask an underlying scent of human misery. John Kozak, known to most as Preacher, sat ramrod straight on the worn vinyl chair. His hands, thick with calluses from years of welding and shaping steel, rested on his knees. He was in his civilian uniform. Faded jeans, worn leather boots, and a plain gray thermal shirt that did little to hide the disciplined muscle of his shoulders and arms. Beside him, his son, Leo, stared at the floor, a blooming purple bruise coloring his left cheek and a neat line of dried blood tracing his split lip. Preacher had already cleaned the wounds with the dispassionate precision of a man who understood damage. The physical part was easy. It was the look in his son's eyes, a dimmed, humiliated flicker that twisted something cold and hard in his gut. Across the chest-high counter, Desk Sergeant Miller finished a loud, theatrical yawn. He was a man who had settled into his uniform like a slug into a shell, soft, pale, and slow-moving. "Okay, Mr. Kozak," he said, his fingers pecking at a keyboard with agonizing slowness. "Let's go over it again. Your son, Leo, was in an alley. 3 unidentified males assaulted him and attempted to take his jacket. He says they kicked him. You have no names, no descriptions beyond teenagers, and no other witnesses." "There was a witness," Preacher stated, his voice a low, even baritone. He refused to let anger texture it. Anger was a useless tool here. "Leo told you. A little girl. She scared them off." Miller offered a weary, patronizing smile. "A little girl who you can't identify, who didn't stick around, right? Look, Mr. Kozak," he leaned forward, his tone shifting into one of conspiratorial world weariness. His eyes flicked to the small, discreet serpent emblem on the vest Preacher had brought in as evidence. "Your boy is wearing colors, even if they're baby colors. He gets into a scrape with some other young bucks. It happens. It's the life, right? Boys will be boys." The condescension was a physical thing, thick and suffocating. Preacher felt his jaw tighten. He had spent 15 years building a legitimate custom fabrication business, raising his son alone, and carefully navigating the space between the club that was his brotherhood and the civilian world that was his home. He had never been arrested. He paid his taxes. His son was an artist, a gentle soul who couldn't throw a convincing punch if his life depended on it. And this man, this functionary of the system meant to protect them, was reducing it all to a cliché. "My son is not in the life," Preacher said, the words coming out like chipped stone. "He was assaulted. I want to file a report." "And we will file a report," Miller sighed, tapping a few more keys with a flourish of indifference. "It'll go into a folder, and that folder will go into a drawer, and that drawer will be full of reports just like it. Unless you've got video or a credible, adult witness who will come in and sign a statement, there's nothing to investigate. It's a he said she said between some kids in an alley." He leaned back, the chair groaning in protest. "My advice? Tell your people to handle their own business. That's what you do, isn't it? Just do us all a favor and keep it off my streets." The dismissal was absolute. It was a clear delineation. "You and your kind are over there. We are over here. You are not the public we are paid to serve and protect." Preacher stood up slowly. He looked at Sergeant Miller, at the smudges on the plexiglass barrier, at the faded Community First poster on the wall behind him. He saw not just a lazy cop, but a rot that ran deeper. A system that sorted people into worthy and unworthy victims. He placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. "Let's go, son," as they walked out, the automatic glass doors hissing shut behind them. Preacher wasn't thinking about the 3 thugs. He was thinking about the little girl who had done Sergeant Miller's job for him. And he was thinking about the casual, corrosive cruelty of a man who believed his son's pain didn't matter. Lily's world was a small 5th-floor apartment that smelled of time, steamed linen, and her grandmother's quiet strength. Elena Munoz was a seamstress, her hands a roadmap of pinpricks and scissor calluses. Their 2-room home was a sanctuary of meticulous order. Spools of thread were arranged by color on the wall like a rainbow abacus. A pot of basil, which Lily tended with solemn diligence, sat on the single windowsill, its leaves reaching for the limited city light. The window overlooked the very alley where the attack had happened, a constant, silent witness. Lily's parents were a ghost story, a faded photograph on the mantle of a smiling young couple, lost too soon in a car accident on a rain-slicked highway. Elena had raised her, weaving a tapestry of folklore, practical wisdom, and an unshakable moral code. There are two kinds of people, Mija, she would say while guiding a stitch. Those who see a wrong and do nothing, and those who see a wrong and do something. The world has enough of the first kind. Lily was a doer, but her actions were small and silent. She drew. In a worn sketchbook, she processed the world, capturing not likenesses, but feelings. After the alley incident, she sat at their small kitchen table and drew for hours. She didn't draw the thugs' faces. They were faceless voids, jagged black shapes of pure menace. She drew Leo as a falling figure, all sharp angles and pale colors. She drew the alley itself as a closing throat of brick and shadow. And in the corner, behind a block of green, she drew a tiny, explosive star of yellow and white, the sound of the breaking bottle, the shape of her own brief, terrifying courage. She didn't tell her grandmother what she had done. The fear that came after the anger was a cold, heavy thing, and she didn't want to place its weight on Elena's shoulders. But that evening, as they ate soup, Elena noticed the silence. "Your hands are very still tonight, little bird," she said softly. Lily just shrugged and pushed a carrot around her bowl. Miles away, in a garage that smelled of ozone, hot metal, and WD-40, Preacher tended to his own world. His garage was the inverse of Lily's apartment, a sprawling space of controlled chaos, but just as meticulous. Wrenches and sockets hung in perfect silhouette on a pegboard. Blueprints for a custom motorcycle frame were laid out on a steel table, weighted down with heavy calipers. This was his sanctuary, the place where he bent steel and iron to his will, creating beauty from raw power. Now he sat on a stool, gently dabbing antiseptic on the cut on Leo's lip. "Hold still," he murmured. Leo flinched, not from the sting, but from the shame. "They ruined my sketchbook," he whispered, his voice thick. "It's just paper, Leo. We'll get you a new 1-inch. "It's not just paper," the boy insisted, looking up, his eyes flashing with a rare fire. "It was the owl, the one with the ruby eyes. I'll never get the gears right again." Preacher's heart ached. He had failed somehow. He had raised a boy of sensitivity and art in a world that often mistook gentleness for weakness. The vest had been his idea, a misguided attempt to give Leo a sense of belonging, a connection to the brotherhood that was Preacher's second family. He had thought the subtle emblem would be a shield, a quiet warning. Instead, it had become a target. He looked at his son's bruised face, the face so like his late wife's, and the cold, controlled rage he'd felt at the precinct began to sublimate into something harder, more resolute. It wasn't about revenge on a few street punks. It was about the broken promise of the world they lived in. It was about the casual dismissal of his son's pain, his son's art, his son's gentle soul. It was about a system that protects only those it deems worthy. And it was about a little girl, a complete stranger, who had shown more honor in a single, desperate act than an entire police station. The retaliation began not with a bang, but with a whisper of malice. The thugs had seen a flicker of movement, a small shape, in the moments after the bottle shattered. It didn't take a detective to connect the dots. The only apartment window with a clear view of that specific spot in the alley was the one on the 5th floor with the pot of basil on the sill. 2 days later, Lily found it on the welcome mat when she went to get the morning paper for her grandmother. A small robin, its neck twisted at an unnatural angle, its feathers still soft. There was no note. None was needed. Lily scooped it up with a piece of newspaper, her hands shaking, and buried it in a planter on the fire escape, her small face a stony mask. She didn't tell Elena. The next day, the graffiti appeared. Smeared in ugly red spray paint on the brick wall directly below her window was a crude, leering skull next to a stick figure of a girl with her eyes crossed out. This Elena saw. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, the bag of groceries she was carrying slipping from her grasp. Oranges rolled across the grimy alley floor. She understood immediately. The story Lily had been hiding tumbled out, a torrent of fear and shame. Elena's own fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective anger. She did what a citizen was supposed to do. She called the police. She was routed to the 12th precinct. By a cruel twist of bureaucratic fate, the officer who took the report was Sergeant Miller. His voice on the phone was thick with boredom. Graffiti and a dead bird. Ma'am? Sounds like kids being cruel. It happens all the time. My advice? Tell your granddaughter to stay away from alleys and mind her own business. Probably for the best, the line went dead. Minding her own business was what the man in the car and the clerk in the store had done. The injustice of it was a bitter pill. The fear in the small apartment became a tangible thing, an unwelcome third resident. Elena began double-locking the door and wedging a chair under the knob at night. She forbade Lily from using the shortcut, making her walk the long way around, a route that added 15 minutes and its own set of anxieties. Lily stopped drawing. Her sketchbook lay closed on her nightstand. The world outside the window was no longer a source of stories, but a landscape of potential threats. The escalation came to its peak a week after the assault. Lily was returning from the corner market, carrying a small bag with milk and bread. As she approached the entrance to her building, a figure detached itself from the shadows of the neighboring brownstone. It was the leader, the one with the chain. He didn't move toward her. He didn't speak. He just stood there about 20 feet away, slowly, deliberately, unwrapping the steel chain from his fist and letting it dangle. The links whispered against each other. Then he smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was a smile of ownership, a quiet promise of future violence, a declaration that he knew who she was, where she lived, and that she was powerless. Lily's blood ran cold. She dropped the bag. The milk carton split, spreading a white pool on the grimy sidewalk, and bolted into her building, not stopping until the apartment door was slammed and locked behind her. She collapsed against it, hyperventilating. The image of that smile burned into her mind. Elena rushed to her, her face etched with panic. Seeing the pure, unadulterated terror in her granddaughter's eyes, she knew the line had been crossed. The police would not help. The system had failed them. They were alone. And then she remembered. A flicker of a memory from the day of the attack. After the thugs had run, she had looked out the window and seen the tall man, the boy's father, helping his son up. He had looked up at her window, his eyes seeming to find hers, and given a short, sharp nod of acknowledgement. Later that evening, he had come to their door. He wanted to thank her granddaughter. Lily had been too scared to come out from her room, but Elena had spoken to him. He was polite, his voice quiet and respectful. His name was John. Before he left, he had pressed a simple business card into her hand. Kozak Custom Steel. It read with a phone number. "My name is Preacher," he'd said. "If you or your granddaughter ever need anything at all, you call this number." At the time, it had seemed like a kind but empty gesture. Now it felt like the only lifeline she had left. Her hands trembling, Elena retrieved the card from the ceramic bowl where she kept buttons and keys. She dialed the number. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Kozak," the voice was low and steady. "Mr. Kozak? This is Elena Munoz, the grandmother of the little girl from the alley." Her own voice was a fragile, trembling thing. There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice softened slightly. "Preacher, and I remember. Is your granddaughter okay?" The simple question, the genuine concern, broke the dam of her composure. The story poured out of her in a frantic, whispered rush. The dead robin, the threatening graffiti, the police officer who told them it was just kids being cruel, and finally, the thug with the chain, waiting for Lily, smiling that terrible smile. He was promising her, Elena sobbed into the phone. He was promising her what he would do. She is just a child, a brave, foolish child, and I cannot protect her. The police, they do nothing. We are alone. In his garage, John Preacher Kozak stood perfectly still, the phone pressed to his ear. He listened to the terrified grandmother's story, and each word was like a drop of ice water on the hot coals of his anger. He gripped the edge of his steel workbench, his knuckles turning white. The dismissal of his son had been an insult to his family. The system's calculated indifference had been an infuriating display of its corruption. But this, the deliberate, escalating terror campaign against a 9-year-old girl, a child whose only crime was an act of courage in the face of ugly violence, this was a violation of a code far older and more sacred than any city ordinance. It was a fundamental law of nature. You do not let the wolves have the lambs. You do not stand by while courage is punished and innocence is terrorized. The thugs had broken a social contract. Sergeant Miller had broken a professional one. They had all, in their own way, created a vacuum of justice. And it was a vacuum his brotherhood was uniquely suited to fill. "You are not alone, Mrs. Munoz," he said. His voice now devoid of all warmth, replaced by a cold, lethal calm. "I promise you that. Stay inside. Lock your doors. It ends tonight." He hung up the phone. He wiped his hands on a rag, not because they were dirty, but because it was a familiar, grounding motion. Then he walked out of his garage and headed for the clubhouse. The Iron Serpent's MC Clubhouse was a nondescript brick warehouse in the industrial part of town, distinguished only by a single, perfectly restored 1940s Indian Chief motorcycle in the front window. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old leather, beer, and brotherhood. At 9 p.m., Preacher stood before the assembled members of his chapter, 30 men who were not the caricatures of television fiction, but mechanics, electricians, veterans, and small business owners. Men bound by a shared code of loyalty and mutual protection. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He laid out the facts with the same dispassionate precision he used to machine a cylinder head. He told them about Leo's assault. He told them about the police's contemptuous dismissal. And then he told them about Lily, the 9-year-old girl who had faced down 3 thugs when every adult had looked away. He described the dead bird, the graffiti, and the final act of intimidation with the chain. He held up his phone, showing them a picture Elena had sent him. Lily's drawing of the black, jagged shapes and the single, explosive star of light. "The system that is paid to protect this child and her grandmother has failed," Preacher said, his voice resonating in the quiet room. "It has failed my son. It has failed this community. It has looked at their fear and it has looked away. We will not," he paused, letting his eyes sweep across the faces of his brothers. "We are not going for vengeance. Vengeance is messy and it is temporary. We are going for justice, and justice requires a witness. So we will be the witness." All of us, a low murmur went through the room, a growl of assent. The club's president, a grizzled veteran named Padre, gave a single, decisive nod. The decision was made. The catalyst had triggered the reaction. The call to ride went out. It traveled not by text blast, but by a chain of quiet, personal phone calls, a ripple spreading outward from their clubhouse. The message was passed from club president to club president, from road captain to road captain, across a network built on years of shared miles and mutual respect. The call went out to the Ridgebacks MC in the next county, to the East Valley Nomads, to the Sons of Odin from 2 states over, and to a dozen smaller, independent clubs who shared their core principles. The message was identical each time, delivered in clipped, sober tones. A child is being targeted. Police are non-responsive. A public stand for the innocent is required. City Hall. Tomorrow 0800 hours. Dress uniform. Black jeans, black boots, clean, plain vests. No colors. No weapons. No exceptions. This is a demonstration of presence, not force. The mobilization was a quiet, cinematic montage unfolding in the pre-dawn darkness across 3 states. In a suburban garage, a contractor named Hammer gently woke his wife. "It's a guardian call," he whispered. She understood. She had the coffee brewing before he had his boots on. In a rural trailer, a young prospect nicknamed Rook carefully polished the chrome on his Road King. his hands moving with the reverence of a sacrament. In dozens of homes, leather vests were pulled from closets, the leather clean, the club patches, the colors, removed and left behind as instructed. This was not about territory or club pride. This was about a shared, fundamental principle. The head counts started coming in, relayed back to the Iron Serpent's sergeant-at-arms. Ridgebacks in. 25 riders, East Valley confirms. 40-inch Sons of Odin are rolling 60 deep. The numbers climbed with relentless certainty. 150. 220. 280. By 5 a.m., the final tally was confirmed. 302. 302 men and women who were sacrificing a day's pay, driving hundreds of miles, on the strength of a promise. As dawn broke, a symphony began. It started as a series of disparate coughs and sputters, a Harley-Davidson shovelhead in one county, an Indian Challenger in another. The individual notes coalesced, first into a low thrum that vibrated through the ground, then into a deep, rolling thunder that shook the morning air. It was the sound of controlled power, of a promise being kept, of a force of nature gathering on the horizon. At 7:55 a.m., the square in front of City Hall was a picture of municipal mundanity. Civil servants hurried up the wide stone steps, clutching briefcases and coffee cups. A handful of local news vans were parked along the curb, their satellite dishes aimed at the sky. Their assignment editors had received an anonymous but credible tip from a law firm about a major public demonstration regarding police negligence. They were expecting a few dozen protesters with picket signs. They were not prepared for what came next. The sound arrived first, a low-frequency hum that vibrated in the chest cavity, felt more than heard. Heads turned, conversations faltered. The hum grew, resolving itself into the distinct, polyphonic rumble of hundreds of V-twin engines. Then they appeared. They came not as a chaotic swarm, but as a disciplined column. Two abreast, they turned onto the main boulevard, their speed a steady, respectful 25 miles per hour. Then the column widened to 4, then 8, a river of black and polished chrome flowing into the square. There was no aggressive engine revving, no burnouts, no displays of outlaw bravado. They moved with the quiet precision of a funeral procession or a military escort. They filled the street, and then, in a display of coordinated practice that spoke of countless hours on the road together, they began to park. In perfect, 45-degree angles to the curb, one after another, until the entire plaza was framed by a formidable barricade of steel. 302 engines were cut in near unison, the thunder collapsing into a sudden, profound silence. The next sound was just as unified, the solid, percussive thud of 600 for heavy leather boots hitting the pavement, a single, resonant drumbeat that seemed to shake the very foundations of the buildings. The riders, men and women of all ages and builds, dismounted. They moved without direction, each knowing their place. They formed ranks on the wide steps of City Hall, a silent, imposing phalanx of black leather and denim. They stood shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed, their expressions grim and resolute. They faced the building, a human wall between the government and the people it had failed. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They simply were. Their presence was the message. Commuters froze, their phones coming out to record the surreal spectacle. The news crews, who had been lazily filming B-roll, scrambled into action, cameras swinging toward the silent army. At the front and center of the formation stood Preacher, his face a mask of iron resolve, his eyes fixed on the bronze doors of the Hall of Justice. The spectacle brought the city's business to a grinding halt. The mayor, a portly man named Thompson whose political career was built on photo ops and platitudes, was hustled out onto the portico by his aides. He was followed by Police Chief Drummond, a man whose arrogance was legendary within the department, his face a mixture of confusion and irritation. Drummond strode forward, his uniform crisp, his authority absolute in his own mind. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice attempting a boom that was swallowed by the sheer absorptive presence of the silent crowd. "This is an illegal assembly. I'm ordering you to disperse immediately." No one moved. The bikers remained as still as statues. From the side of the formation, a woman in a sharp gray pantsuit stepped forward. She carried a leather portfolio. This was Maria Flores, the Iron Serpent's legal counsel, a woman whose courtroom demeanor was as formidable as any biker's road presence. "This is a lawful and peaceful assembly, Chief Drummond," she said, her voice clear and cutting, easily carrying in the silence. "And we will not be dispersing. This demonstration is about the repeated, documented, and negligent failure of the 12th Precinct to protect a 9-year-old child from a campaign of terror." She opened her portfolio. "And we have brought receipts." The news cameras pushed closer, their microphones extended like metallic arms. Maria Flores began her presentation with the clinical precision of a surgeon. She produced a thick dossier, its pages meticulously organized. "Exhibit A," she announced, a sworn affidavit from Elena Munoz, the child's legal guardian, detailing a series of escalating threats against her granddaughter, Lily. She held up a copy of the ignored police report. "Exhibit B, the official record of Mrs. Munoz's call to your 12th Precinct, and the dismissive, unprofessional response from Sergeant Miller, who classified the terrorizing of a child as kids being cruel." She then held up a series of large, glossy photographs. The first showed the ugly red graffiti of the skull and the stick figure girl. The second showed the small, pathetic corpse of the dead Robin. "Exhibit C, photographic evidence of the threats, which your department deemed unworthy of investigation." Then came the centerpiece. "Your officer claimed there were no witnesses and no evidence," Flores continued, her voice ringing with cold fury. "He was wrong. He was just too lazy to look." She nodded to an aide, who connected a laptop to a large monitor a biker had set up. "My clients, using their own resources, acquired security footage from a warehouse across the alley. Footage your department never even requested." The video began to play. The grainy, black and white footage was damning. It showed the 3 thugs, their faces clearly visible, surrounding Leo. It showed the brutal, cowardly kicks as he lay on the ground. It showed the flash of movement from behind the dumpster, and then the thugs fleeing. It even showed a small, brave face peeking out after they were gone. But Flores wasn't finished. She fast-forwarded the footage. "And here," she said, "is footage from 2 days ago." The video now showed the lead thug, the one with the chain, returning to the scene. He looked directly up at Lily's window, a smirk on his face, before walking away. It was irrefutable proof of targeted harassment. Finally, Preacher stepped forward. Flores handed him a small, battery-powered megaphone. His voice, calm and amplified, washed over the stunned crowd. He didn't speak of biker codes or club business. He told the simple, human story of a boy who was beaten, a little girl who was brave, and a system that had turned its back on them both. He pointed a thumb over his shoulder at the silent ranks behind him. "These men and women are here today because a 9-year-old girl was more courageous than the entire city police force. They have come from 3 states, sacrificing their time and their wages to stand for her because you would not. We are not asking for vengeance. We are demanding accountability. We are not leaving until this is made right." The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. The live news broadcast was being picked up by national affiliates. The mayor's office phone lines were flooded. The term Sergeant Miller was trending on social media, accompanied by photos of the silent bikers and screenshots of the damning evidence. Mayor Thompson, a creature of public opinion, saw his political future evaporating before his eyes. He turned on Chief Drummond, his face pale and sweaty. "Handle this, Frank," he hissed. "Handle this now." Chief Drummond, cornered and publicly humiliated, saw only one way out. He strode to the bank of microphones, his own bravado shattered. Effective immediately, he announced, his voice strained, "I am launching a full-scale criminal investigation into this assault and the subsequent harassment. Furthermore, I have opened a formal internal affairs investigation into the conduct of Sergeant Miller and the procedural failures at the 12th Precinct." It wasn't enough for Flores. "Warrants, Chief," she demanded. Now cornered, Drummond spoke into his radio. The names and images of the thugs were broadcast to every patrol car in the city. Within the hour, squad cars descended on Northwood High School. The three thugs were pulled from their classrooms, their casual arrogance dissolving into disbelief and fear. The leader was found with the steel chain in his locker. By noon, all three were in custody. Officer Miller was officially placed on administrative leave, escorted from his desk in a scene that would become the lead story on the evening news. Preacher, Flores, and a small delegation of club presidents were ushered into the mayor's office. The tone was no longer one of confrontation, but of negotiation. Preacher made his demands clear. They didn't want money. They didn't want special treatment or charges dropped for their own. They wanted change. They demanded the city fund a new, independent community oversight board for the police. They demanded a mandatory child safety protocol for any crime reported involving a minor, requiring an in-person follow-up within 24 hours. And they proposed the creation of a city-sponsored youth outreach program focused on anti-bullying, offering their own members as volunteer mentors. The mayor, seeing a path to spin this disaster into a story of reform, eagerly agreed to everything. Only when Flores received confirmation of the arrests and a signed memorandum of understanding from the mayor's office did she step back out onto the city hall steps and give Preacher a single nod. He turned to his brothers and sisters. He didn't need the megaphone. He raised his hand, fist closed. And then, as one, they turned. They walked down the steps, their boots echoing in the now quiet square. They mounted their motorcycles with the same disciplined unison they had shown upon arrival, and in a rolling wave of controlled thunder, they departed, leaving the street empty, the air thick with the smell of exhaust and the dawn of a new accountability. 6 months later, the city was a different place. The ripples from that day had spread wide and deep. Chief Drummond had taken an early retirement. His replacement was a woman from outside the department, renowned for her commitment to community policing. The Independent Oversight Board was a reality, its meetings televised and well-attended. Officer Miller was fired for gross negligence, his career in law enforcement over. The three thugs were convicted in juvenile court. The leader was sent to a detention facility, while his two followers were given lengthy probations, mandatory counseling, and community service. The most visible change, however, was the Iron Serpents themselves. Their public image, once shrouded in fear and myth, had been recast. They were no longer seen as a menace, but as protectors. They had made good on their promise. The Guardian program was born. Every morning and afternoon, in neighborhoods where kids felt unsafe, the low rumble of a motorcycle was a common sound. A lone biker, wearing a simple vest with a small new patch, a serpent coiled around a single star, would park at the end of a block, a silent, watchful presence, ensuring children could walk to and from school without fear. The club, in partnership with the city, had also taken over the lease on a derelict community center, their members spending weekends renovating it, turning it from a ruin into a vibrant hub for after-school programs. In his garage, Preacher watched his son work. Leo was at a drafting table, his hand moving with fluid confidence, sketching the complex inner workings of a new fantastical creature. The haunted, humiliated look was gone from his eyes, replaced by the focused light of creation. He was no longer afraid. The world was still a place with sharp edges, but he now knew there were people who would stand with him against them. Taped to the wall above the table was a framed drawing, a gift that had arrived by mail a month after the demonstration. It was from Lily. It depicted a colossal, friendly-looking serpent, its scales rendered as interlocking gears and plates of iron, coiled protectively around a tiny apartment building. In a single window on the 5th floor, a warm yellow light was on, and a small pot of basil sat on the sill. The final scene of the transformation took place not in a seat of power, but at a simple neighborhood street fair. The air smelled of grilled hot dogs and cotton candy. Lily held her grandmother's hand, her eyes bright with the simple joy of the day. She was not looking over her shoulder. She was not scanning for shadows. Her gaze fell upon a charity stall raising money for the new community center. A large, familiar man in a black t-shirt was at the grill, expertly flipping burgers. It was Preacher. He looked different without his vest, more like a neighborhood dad than a biker leader. He looked up, saw her, and a genuine warm smile spread across his face. He gave her a thumbs up. Lily, her own face breaking into a rare, wide grin, gave him a small, confident wave back. In the distance, the sound of a motorcycle rumbled, a low, thrumming note in the symphony of the city. For Lily, it was no longer a sound of danger or fear. It was the sound of a promise. It was the sound of safety.